Welcome to the RC-sponsored session at AACNU's 2021 annual meeting. My name's Stephen Dandino, and I'm the Executive Director of the Reinvention Collaborative, as well as Associate Provost at Colorado State University, our host institution. Today's session is entitled, What Has COVID Taught Us? Seizing the Crisis to Advance Equity and Excellence in Undergraduate Education at Research Universities. The RC is a national consortium of public and private research universities dedicated to innovation and excellence in undergraduate education. We are an organization that is over 20 years old, inspired by the 1998 Boyer Commission report, as are many AACNU members. It is my pleasure to welcome today's moderator, Dr. Colin Potts, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at the Georgia Institute of Technology, aka Georgia Tech. Dr. Potts is also the president of the Reinvention Collaborative. Thanks so much, Colin.
Thanks, Steve. Well, welcome everyone. So we're going to have, as far as possible, a conversational session. What we'll do is introduce our distinguished participants first, and they'll make some remarks about their particular institutions. We're going to be really discussing what COVID has taught us and how we've responded. And as you'll see, we have institutions that are based in large cities and smaller towns, the publics and privates, those with the science and technology emphasis, and a religious background. So a lot of commonality, a lot of difference, and I think this will probably resonate with many institutions, both what we have learned and what we plan to do going forward. So let me briefly introduce our participants today. First of all, from Boston College, have Akua Sarr, who's the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Academic Affairs, and Stacy Grooters, who's the Director of the Center for Teaching Excellence. From Oregon State University, as John Boeckenstedt, the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management, and Alix Gitelman, who's the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. And from Virginia Tech, Rachel Holloway, who is the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Academic Affairs and the President-elect of the Reinvention Collaborative, and Kimberly Smith, who's the Assistant Provost for Academic Advising Initiatives. So quite a heavyweight crew of people, and I know many of them very well, and I'm sure we're going to have a really great conversation. Let me pass it first of all over to you, Akua. If you could give an overview of how you think Boston College has really responded to the pandemic and plans for going forward.
Sure. Thank you so much, Colin, for the introduction. I thought I'd start with just giving a little bit of an institutional overview. We are Boston College, but we are a university. We have a total population of about 14,000 students, and our undergraduate enrollment is over 9,000 students. We are a Jesuit Catholic university, so what that means is that we really place a very strong emphasis on a liberal arts education as the foundation of all of our degrees, regardless of the school or college or major. We also place a strong emphasis on student formation, which means that we educate men and women who value reflection, discernment, and service to others. One of our deans often says that at BC, we care just as much about who our students become as what they become. So, we are a very traditional residential university. We value really close interaction between faculty and students. Prior to COVID, I think I can safely say that we did not offer any online classes for undergraduate students. We actually did not even allow undergraduate students to transfer online courses from other universities into BC. So this shift was a huge shift for us, and a huge cultural shift for our faculty, who really were skeptical about online and hybrid education as to how this would work. We opened in the fall. We welcomed all of our students back to campus. We did not de-densify our dorms. We did approve about 800 students for remote learning, and the majority of those students were international students who faced travel restrictions. So our housing was full. Our residential housing were full. The only thing we did was we de-densified. Well, we didn't de-densify, we de-tripled our rooms that were tripled. That's all we did. But other than that, housing was full with over 7,000 students in campus housing. 50% of our classes were completely online. Those were primarily our large courses, over 75 students and up. Those were asynchronous and synchronous. And then the other 50% were face-to-face, either hybrid or completely face-to-face. We spread out our classrooms so the desks were 3 to 5 feet away from each other. Students and faculty, of course, all had to wear masks, and faculty had about an 8 to 9 foot space between themselves and the students. All of our university offices were open, but many had sort of a skeletal crew, and many offices decided to work remotely. We made it. We never had to shut down during the semester. We made it through. At Thanksgiving, we had students had the choice of whether or not they would leave the state of Massachusetts. They were not allowed to come back. They finished remotely, and other students stayed in the state of Massachusetts, and then they remained on campus until the end of the semester. I will very briefly talk about my own experience. I did teach this semester. I did teach face-to-face. I had a first year seminar of about 20 students. Our classroom capacity was about 40. So students were spread out. We were all masked. It wasn't an ideal way to teach a seminar, but it worked. We managed, and we made it work. I think safely report, and maybe Stacy can correct me, that we did not have any COVID transmissions in our classrooms. So all of our COVID transmissions happened outside of the classroom, in residential halls and off campus, and students gathering in groups. I think that, as I said, I think that faculty that were skeptical about how you could teach a rigorous and engaging course online or hybrid, I think many became converts, or at least I think they were able to use technology really successfully, even with all of the challenges. And now I think I'm going to shift over to Stacy, who can talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and some of the successes, I think, and the lessons that faculty learned.
Thanks, Akua. And I'm going to try and keep this brief and highlight a couple themes that we've noticed, and then hope that that can be part of the conversation as we move forward. Looking at particularly the subtitle of our session about seizing the crisis to advance equity and excellence in undergraduate education, there's, that language of seizing the crisis is a little problematic to me, but whether or not we seize it, it's going to impact where we head from here. And so I've been thinking a lot about two particular ways that things that have definitely emerged over the past year that I think are going to stick with us moving forward, that both have implications for equity and excellence in teaching. And one of those has to do with technology. and the way that the pandemic has forced us to expand our collective imagination of what technology makes possible for teaching and learning. And some of that has been about just basically expanding instructors' pedagogical toolkits. We have more faculty now with a greater experience with a wider range of learning technologies. And while I'm confident that some are going to happily jettison all of that once they get the chance, when we return to the fully in-person classroom, I also anticipate a lot of faculty are going to continue to want to draw on those tools in the years ahead. Virtual office hours is a simple example that comes up a lot, that we hear from faculty who are saying, actually, I've been able to better serve my students, better reach my students, engage with more of them. Office hours is starting to feel like what I wanted them to be in the first place. So I'm guessing that virtual office hours are going to live beyond us. But I think more to the point of today's conversation, our expanded use of technology has also allowed campus leaders to imagine more efficient delivery of teaching and learning. So not being able to sit physically in the classroom is no longer going to be seen as a legitimate barrier to not being able to attend class. And I'm thinking that's both for students and faculty, right? That faculty member who might have said, hey, I'm traveling for a conference this week, I'm going to need to cancel class. That might no longer be seen as an unquestionably legitimate excuse, right? There might be an expectation that, hey, I think you can log on to Zoom and figure out a way to have class from your hotel room, right? So, and of course for students as well, the commentary around snow days of late, I think, is emblematic of this embrace of efficiency through technology. The governor of my state, all the way back in June, was declaring in press conferences, no more snow days. So she's implying that remote learning has, the potential to eliminate all the existing disruptions that we currently have to teaching and learning, right? And it's that way that we're seeing technology as being touted as a way to increase efficiency, to decrease disruption, that bumps up against the other really clear lesson from the pandemic that I'm hoping is the one that we hear more loudly, frankly, and that is the very human limits of teaching and learning, again, for both students and instructors. Last spring, as students started logging in to class from home, instructors were forced to attend to differences among their students that just weren't visible before. So they had to recognize that students were learning from different home situations. They had different technology access. They had different family responsibilities, right? And so all of a sudden, these differences that they could have ignored in the past, were still really meaningful to that student. We're still impacting that student's ability to learn, but we could ignore them because they weren't coming into our classrooms. We couldn't ignore them anymore, right? And similarly, for faculty, they had to confront their own limitations, right? We saw a ubiquitous number of thought pieces on faculty burnout, and those spoke to real challenges. This is a population of people who often ground their identities in the pursuit of inhuman levels of productivity and excellence. And they finally had to confront the fact that they might need to settle for, good enough every once in a while this past year. And so, the question that I'm really interested in thinking about is, how do we structure our institutions and our systems going forward so we can still hang on to the best of what technology offers, while also not losing track of that really essential lesson about our human frailty and the necessity to really lean into our humanity and to recognize that in the classroom. And I think if we can do that, we really can reach new levels of excellence and equity. But I think it's going to be a struggle. I think we're going to have people who are going to say, hey, you can teach anywhere, anytime, all the time. And we know that while maybe technically that's possible, in terms of our humanity, it really isn't. And so I'm wondering how we're going to create what the university is going to look like moving forward that maybe can embrace both of those realities.
Well, thanks, both of you. I didn't know that you had snow days in Boston. I thought it was only us kind of weak Southerners that couldn't handle the weather. But hand over to Oregon State. Thanks very much. And I think, John, are you going to take it away, or Alix?
I think Alix is going first.
Alix, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I'll just do a real quick introduction of Oregon State. We're the land-grant university in Oregon. And as such, we have a presence in all 36 counties of Oregon. We have two campuses. Our main campus is in Corvallis, and we have a satellite campus in Bend, Oregon. We also have a presence at the coast in Newport and up in Portland. And so our response to the pandemic has been varied depending upon the sector and depending upon governor's orders that have been different at times in different counties across the state. We're on a quarter system, and so we just completed our fall quarter. Our winter quarter begins today. Actually, first day of classes is today. And so we're on a slightly different time frame than some of the other institutions on semester schedules. We have been primarily remote in the fall, and we will continue that mode into the winter. We have at our Corvallis campus, between 5 and 10% of courses are meeting face-to-face, and those are really primarily our experiential learning and laboratory-based courses, and everything else is meeting remotely. We very quickly learned in the fall that the hardest way to teach is to have students both remote and on campus at the same time. And so it makes it really difficult for an instructor to teach in that modality. And so we have more remote probably than we had hoped for, but that I think seems to be the best way pedagogically forward. We do have quite a large presence online. Our eCampus programs and enrollments account for almost a third of our enrollments at Oregon State. We have about 33,000 students in total, about 24,000 of those undergraduate and the rest graduate. And we've benefited from having such a large eCampus presence. And so the shift to remote for many of our faculty was not, it was a lot, but maybe not as much as some of the folks experienced at Boston College. And so I will pass it to John now to talk a little bit about enrollment issues at Oregon State.
Thanks, Alix. Enrollment management at Oregon State includes typical offices like the admissions and registrar, scholarships, financial aid office. And of course, those are offices that love the calendar and have routines. And there was probably no function in any university that was as disrupted as ours. What we found is that the really gratifying and amazing thing for us was the extent to which everybody at the university really pulled together with a common purpose. And our team and our staff members felt extraordinarily supported by other members of the institution throughout academic affairs, student affairs, facilities operations, every sort of organization you could possibly imagine. One of the biggest lessons I think we've learned is that the simple ability to say, I have no idea, when asked a question about our very specific and esoteric areas was probably perhaps the most humanizing and the most important lesson we've learned through this.
Thanks, John. I'm sure most of us are used to our colleagues saying that we have no idea. So it's good to know that the transparency is working. Next, I'd like to introduce Rachel Holloway and Kimberly Smith from Virginia Tech. Could you how are things there?
Well, we are back at work after the break today, starting the regular calendar in a couple of weeks. So a little bit about Virginia Tech. We have 30,000 undergraduate students. We are the land grant in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There's a sister land grant at Virginia State University as well, and we collaborate with them, as Oregon State described, across the Commonwealth of Virginia. While the majority of our students, our undergraduate students, are in Blacksburg, which is a very small, typical college town in rural Southwest Virginia. We do have sites across the Commonwealth, but those are primarily where you see graduate programs, our extension offices. So the majority of undergrads are here in our little small town. We are a strongly residential campus still. In the previous fall, we had 10,000 students living on campus. We pulled that number down to 8,500 this last semester, but fully in residence with living learning communities, dining, as you see at most residential campuses. So similar to BC in that way. And most of our students did come back to town. We had a number that stayed remote, living at home or elsewhere, but we really did see the majority of the student population come back to Blacksburg. We followed our standard semester calendar with the exception that we moved online after our Thanksgiving break. We've always had a full week off at Thanksgiving. That gave our students time to get home or wherever they intended to finish the semester. And throughout all of this, we've provided the opportunity for students who needed to remain in Blacksburg due to whatever situation, whether that's not being able to have sufficient technology access at home or elsewhere, or needing to be here rather than in a different situation. We've maintained that opportunity. And we did have a number of international students at the undergraduate level who were able to return that had stayed in the US, but we actually launched a special program for our new students, international students who were unable to make it to the US. And we can discuss that if that's of interest. I would say part of our work, and I'll let Kim discuss this more, is in undergraduate academic affairs, while we have some of the offices such as undergraduate research and general education, we are the primary central support for student support activities, including academic advising. And so we partner with colleges in a highly decentralized large university. And so Kim, I will let you explain a little bit about that and some key themes that we've learned over the fall semester.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Holloway. I'd just like to share with you, as our colleagues have mentioned, that this was just such a unique opportunity for us to really look at new initiatives, but also we really had to learn as we were going. And so we tried to make a concerted effort to really attend to the needs of our students. And one of the very first opportunities for that happened back in spring when our students first made the shift to virtual learning, and our colleagues in student affairs disseminated a survey to our students just to get a better pulse of how they were adjusting, what were their needs. And one of the surprising findings for us was that students identified their academic advisors as one of their most important and helpful connections during that term. Now, we shouldn't be surprised by that because advising is all about the relationship and establishing rapport. But what it did help us to do was to reframe the importance of advising for those advisors who were struggling to find identity and purpose throughout this pandemic process. And so that was extremely helpful for us. Also, another important lesson learned was the fact that we had already made an investment in a centralized and shared technology platform prior to the pandemic. That proved invaluable because it helped us to facilitate remote engagement significantly. Specifically, the platform we used, it allowed for online appointment scheduling. It allowed for virtual information sharing, record keeping, and really, we were really looking at the platform more to help with our holistic care of our students so that all of us on campus who are committed to student success could better understand the student's journey. So when we decided to move virtually, we were able to really leverage this centralized technology in a way that resolved many of the issues for students and academic advisors alike. As you all probably know, any new technology sometimes comes with challenges of getting buy-in, but the timing of the pandemic and the challenges that arose really helped us to better engage advisors and get better buy-in across the institution for this particular technology platform. As well, we really learned the importance of ongoing work to build a university-wide network and community of advisors, and how important that is in terms of our response as an institution. So a couple of examples of that. Number one, I would say more than ever, we really understood the importance of having a centralized oversight of campus-wide academic advising initiatives. Our current advising model is very decentralized. Every college, every department could deliver it in a very different way. But because we had an individual at the table helping to make decisions about how we make this shift, what are the implications, we knew that advising always had a voice in the decision-making process. The other essential thing that we did, we thought was really important, was we wanted to make sure advisors at all levels and at all times had the most up-to-date and accurate information that we had available for them. As you know, things were changing on a daily basis. And so we implemented a regular virtual academic advising town hall. Any person on campus was eligible to participate in those. And we would have many of the decision makers there to help better understand what some of the challenges are for our students, to better explain some of the decisions were being made. And we found that advisors were extremely appreciative of the ability to hear how the decisions were made and what would be the implications. Lastly, in terms of that campus-wide response, we found that there was increased engagement in professional development. So this was from the side of both student success providers, as well as our faculty, actually. Our faculty were very committed to learning and understanding better how to transition their courses over to a virtual world. But as well, our advisors and other support service providers wanted to ensure that they were meeting the needs of their students. Last lesson learned was this created a great opportunity for us to really re-examine our new student orientation program. We have a very highly successful orientation program that had over 90% participation rate. But for many years, we have known that our student population was changing and we needed to deliver in some very different ways. But because we had that high percentage rate of participation, we had a hard time getting folks to think about how do we better meet the needs for our new and evolving student population. And so this pandemic provided us that opportunity to really delve into how we could do better job with our virtual student orientation.
Okay, well, thanks. This is great. This is a really great introduction from everybody. I won't give an introduction about Georgia Tech, other than to say, of course, what some people may not know is that, I mean, we are a traditional undergraduate serving institution, and our undergraduates are, traditional age, high school leaving students. We have very, very few who come back to study later in life or who are part-time. Well, our graduate population is completely different. About half of our on-campus, about a third of our on-campus population are graduate students, kind of people you would imagine pursuing PhDs, master's students, doing residential programs. But we're about a 50-50 institution now. 50% of our students are graduates and graduate students, and most of those are in a small number of fully online programs which have been developed in the past 7 or 8 years. And they were designed from scratch. And one of the things I think that we have learned from the pandemic, as we've moved so much of our teaching remote, is that we have to make a distinction between distance or remote education on the one hand, and online education, remote and versus distance education on the other, education that's really planned with that in mind. One of the things that we have been very pleasantly surprised by over the past few years among our graduate students is that their need for support networks and if you like, the kind of pastoral aspects of education, forming mentor groups, tutoring, advising, very, very different, obviously, from students who are on campus and often who are younger. And this has worked very, very effectively. I must admit, I was a skeptic. I thought that we might be removing something of great humanity from education by moving these programs online. And now I think, I can't remember whether it's 1/12 or 12%. Say 10%, it's in the middle, of all computer science master's graduates in this country every year get a master's degree from Georgia Tech. So it's a huge volume operation, and yet it's actually seemed to be a very personal experience and customized experience for those students. Not so with the experience of our undergraduates in the last few months, and this might be an experience that we can talk about. One of the things that has perhaps surprised us or not surprised us, that it's not just the teaching online and the providing of the difficulties of hybrid classes, but all of the other things that are associated with the college experience. We've had residential students who come to campus and yet they're taking many of their courses in a predominantly online hybrid mode, or even fully online or fully remote, I should say. Has anybody got any sort of feedback or comments about how this is really working in your institutions? Are you, in terms of student sort of satisfaction and the overall experience of being a student and relating to their colleagues and so forth? Akua?
Sure, I can start. I think we have found it's been very difficult for undergraduate students. I think that's one of the things we've heard is that there's nothing to do. You know, they're on campus. They're used to having a very full residential experience with clubs and organizations and going to sporting events. And, you know, there are no fans at the stadium. You know, none of the student organizations are meeting face to face. Everything is online. So I think that's one of the things we've heard from our colleagues in student affairs, that finding things to sort of keep students busy has been difficult. And, you know, so, you know, we've had an uptick in the number of students, for example, that were, you know, suspended from housing because, you know, they were having gatherings and getting together. And frankly, I felt like you can't really blame them, because there's not really much for them to really do. As much as they wanted to be on campus, I think a number of students felt as if, you know, it wasn't the same sort of experience. I will also mention, as far as courses, we also found the asynchronous courses, I think, were more difficult for students to remain engaged in than the synchronous or the hybrid. I think a number of students that we've heard from felt sort of disengaged with the asynchronous courses. Although I think there are ways faculty can engage students asynchronously, I'm not sure how well, you know, all of those courses worked from students' perspective. I see Rachel has her hand. Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel.
I would say we learned very similar things. Asynchronous, especially for our first semester, first year students, they just don't have the experience to manage. They are used to having that transition from place to place to help them structure their day. The places where I think we saw some really great success, our science lab community and our folks who really do a lot of field work in ag and life sciences and natural resources worked extremely hard to maintain the face-to-face opportunity. And those have gone exceptionally well. And, you know, places we have lots of competition teams in engineering, sustaining those for students. And the other area where we saw such significant effort to maintain a lot of in-person, face-to-face engaged learning was in our School of Architecture, that used their own ability to structure space in ways that allowed people to come together safely and maintain that sense of collaboration, studio-based work. It wasn't without its bumps along the way, but I think those efforts have really taught us much about how we can help students stay engaged. The asynchronous piece, we are really working. We did a special course design institute focused on student engagement in remote learning environments, because our students were feeling it and our faculty so wanted to engage, but still needed greater knowledge and skill to do that in an online environment. So we're really trying to put as much professional development in that area as we can for our faculty.
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of move on because you said something really interesting there, Rachel, about the architects as an example. And, you know, it occurs to me that we're not manufacturing plants or retail operations. We're universities. We are full of people who are experts in things. And, you know, we have architects and we have epidemiologists and we have communication experts, and we preach and profess a lot. Have we practiced what we're preaching? I mean, how much have we brought to bear the expertise that is on our campuses as research universities? Do you have any experiences to share in this regard? Alix?
Yeah, I can share. We've done a TRACE project at OSU that's really been led out of our colleges of science and public health, where we're doing contact tracing and we're doing testing. We're not doing we don't have, again, we don't have, it sounds like, the same on-campus presence that many of the other universities do, but we are doing tracing and testing of folks it's called the OSU Trace Project, and we even extended it out into the community. And so this is this has been funded federally to really get a sense for the community spread of the disease in Corvallis and at our campus in Bend, and even at our location at Newport. And so that has very much engaged faculty and scientists at OSU.
I would add, it was great to see our scientists really step into this moment. Yeah. And I think this is probably true at Georgia Tech as well, and others. Some of our scientists dropped their research and immediately worked to develop tests and provide testing. And, where we are in Southwest Virginia, I was really pleased that the university accepted its land grant mission and provided 50% of all our testing capacity to the health districts in our region, because otherwise we weren't sure how quickly we would be able to ramp up testing in a very remote and large service area for those areas. And then, things like our biochemistry faculty made COVID and the virus the subject of the entire semester. As the basis for understanding. So I know that's happened across campus, science and technology studies, policy making. So I think lots of faculty really tried to bring their expertise to the students and engage the students in the work, in the problem solving. And I think that's what we're all about. And I'm so pleased to see faculty stepping into that moment.
Yeah, Stacy?
Sure. I mean, that last comment just also speaks to, I think, that question of equity. One thing we've had a few faculty think really carefully and compassionately about how they bring COVID into the classroom, right? So we have an epidemiologist who's been really thoughtful and a little bit cautious, recognizing the fact that this has brought true pain and trauma to our students. And so to not just, mindlessly say, hey, we're going to throw some COVID content because it's a current example, but really think about how we do this in a way that's sensitive to the fact that this is causing real pain to some of our students. And so I think that's also been an interesting place where faculty have had to think more about the humanity of their students and where they're coming from as individuals. At the same time, they're taking advantage of these, exciting new developments that are ripe for investigation and reflection. I think the other connection, it was interesting to me that we shifted from this conversation about asynchronous online learning to kind of expertise, because I think one thing that's also been very clear to me is that the classes that have been the most successful in that kind of traditional asynchronous online mode are the ones where kind of everybody came into it understanding what they were doing, right? Like that the faculty were well trained and had decided, yes, this is what I want to do, and I see the purpose. And the students said, yes, I want to take this online course because that serves my needs. And so, yeah, graduate students have been able to manage that much better than undergrads, because for a lot of them, it does meet their needs. And it is those, first and second year students who need more structure, who need more connection, that just their heads weren't in the game for being able to do that kind of self-directed. Even though those courses are incredibly well structured and there's a lot of support, there's still a little more onus on the student to kind of show up and take the initiative. And so I guess it's important, I think, to recognize that we also have expertise on our campuses in developing really good traditional online courses. It's just they've been taxed. Everybody's been taxed in the current context, that they haven't had the time to lean into that expertise and take advantage of it.
What about leadership in sense of what we're providing? I mean, we're all vice provosts, assistant provosts, whatever, muckety-mucks of various kinds, and our job is to really marshal and coordinate the immense talent that exists on universities, and not just to solve problems, but to help people do this. And we've been thrust into this very, very different kind of way of working. Not just, here we are all with our little kind of pictures on a screen, which I think the whole world is experiencing. But how does faculty governance, for example, work in the context of having to make fairly rapid safety-related decisions that affect people's lives and have to be made quickly? This is something I think, you know, there are issues of equity as well, and life-work balance and family friendliness that really affect faculty, that we've been hearing about, certainly at Georgia Tech, I'm sure, kind of a common issue. I wonder if there's any cases where those concerns may have come up against perhaps a sort of a student focus in some respects, and how you might have resolved or seen those disagreements play out.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I'll take a quick stab at that. One of my favorite quotes of all time was John Ciardi, who said, university is what happens when a college stops caring about students. And it struck me as you know, really interesting as we went into this. And I was so extraordinarily gratified to be working at a place like Oregon State, where virtually every decision we made, and we made it quickly, despite the rhetoric about universities not being able to make decisions quickly, was really student focused. So we sort of watched in horror as institutions kick students out of the residence halls, you know, in spring term, and told them to go home, because we knew that some of our students didn't have a home, and that doing so would have been, you know, would have been compounding the issue for them. We extended add drop changes and time to change to pass fail courses in the spring quarter. We refunded housing deposits for students who felt they had to leave, or housing contracts and no cancellation fees. We extended our admission deposit past May 1st, first to June 1st, and then September 1st. And for those students who wanted to come to OSU in the fall, but for whatever reason decided they couldn't, we agreed to hold their scholarship for 2 years if they wanted to get an associate's degree first, which all of those were really sort of unprecedented. But again, the gratifying thing was there was almost no dissent or discussion about whether we should do the right thing for the students or the right thing for the university bottom line. And that was, I think, a lesson that I'm still hearing from people external to the university about how they appreciated our leadership and our vision and our decisiveness in doing so. And I think whatever the crisis may be in the future, I don't think you can go wrong, even at a major research university, with putting students and their needs first.
Yeah,
John just hit on something I think we've learned, and Kim, I'd like you to speak to this. When you take the student's perspective, it's not just academics, it is financial aid, it is their living environment, it is making sure they have food and housing and all of those things that we know impacted students so desperately. One of the things that happens when you're in a small town and you're the major employer is when we went fully remote last spring, many of our students who depended on working at the university lost work. And thinking about all of this truly holistically from the student perspective, I think has forced us into a much more collaborative mode. And I'm going to turn to Kim, because I think the advisors have been so frontline on understanding the experiences of our students and really their full experience, not just their academic one. So Kim, you might share what your folks have been sharing.
Absolutely. We have always known that advising and any student support service is critical to connecting students to the resources that are available. At all of our institutions, we have a wealth of resources, but it does no good if the student doesn't know how to connect to it. And so part of our professional development that we wanted to enhance was around making sure that students knew all the opportunities that were available to them and how we may learn to triage some of that and make appropriate referrals. And so we were able to really enhance our academic referral system within our platform that we purchased so that we could refer the students very quickly and they could get a very quick response from those key decision makers who would play a part of that. A part of that, as you mentioned, had to do with a number of students who no longer had access to work on campus, and they were very dependent on those funds. And so we were able to leverage with our Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid ways in which we could still make sure that those students had employment. We had to get pretty creative with some of the jobs and projects, but it really turned out to be a great and wonderful learning experience that we now will continue to enhance moving forward. You know, as I think we all learned, we will never go back to what was. We're going to pick up these new lessons learned and continue to move forward.
Yeah, this is this is very heartwarming to hear, actually. I think one of the things that we sometimes take for granted as administrators is that we have a sort of global view of things that are going on. And I think being able to share that, you know, that, as you say, that the student's experience is not just in the classroom, it's not just academic in the narrow sense, it's the entire experience, and decisions that get made in one kind of niche might have ramifications that people working just from that perspective don't necessarily share or don't necessarily have. And it's been, I think, one of the most rewarding, you know, things from my point of view that we've been able to see a much broader awareness across, you know, what is a very large campus. One of the things I think that's is always a challenge at research universities, and it's not that the research and teaching are in conflict, which is the normal trope. It's just that when you get large, you tend to see things from your perspective, and you tend to focus on a kind of a narrow range of problems. And it's been really, really great to see people from all over the campus working together on problems that they don't normally think of as their problem. So let's turn, actually, you know, if that's a kind of an optimistic thing, you know, making lemonade out of lemons, to the future. What is it that we have learned collectively, perhaps mistakes we've made that we're not going to make again, or things that have dropped in our lap as surprises, and wow, this has actually worked surprisingly well, or we could keep doing this. You know, we didn't really plan on it, but it's working. A little tweak here, a little tweak there, and after we go back to the normal state of affairs, whatever the new normal is, next year, the year after, whenever, how will things be, and how have we learned from this experience? What will Boston College or Virginia Tech or Oregon State look like in the future that's different from 2019?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to some of what Stacy mentioned in her comments. I think that, you know, some of what we learned have been, you know, the ways in which we can really use technology well. But I also, my fear, similar to Stacy's, is, you know, I'm sure we all are thinking about students' mental health, faculty's mental health, and, you know, now that, you know, no more snow days, you know, we've already canceled our spring break. You know, the Boston Marathon is not happening, so we've canceled Patriots Day. We're having classes on Patriots Day. We're having, you know, and so I know that, you know, we have to have a certain number of classes during the semester, but you know, my fear is that with all of this great use of technology, that we're going to sacrifice, you know, our own and our students' mental health. And so that concerns me. So it's sort of a good thing on the one hand, but I'm afraid of what's going to happen with all of our use of technology.
Well, in Akua, I think we also have to keep remembering that mental health is a foundation for learning, right? Like wellness and being able to have breaks allows people to come back and be better learners. And so if we truly want excellence in education, then we also have to embrace, you know, all the bodies that are embracing that education and making sure they have time to be physically well and mentally well and have social connection, and all of those things are necessary for our goals around education. They're not just distractions from it, which I think we sometimes get tempted to see it as.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think if there's anything good that's come out of this, it's maybe our understanding of work. You know, I know a lot of people that have been completely opposed to the idea of remote work for staff members for a long time, who have had their whole vision of how productive and effective you can be working remotely. And we face it, you know, Corvallis is a relatively small city, and attracting tech workers from San Francisco or Chicago or even Portland can be kind of difficult. And we've discovered that our tech workers don't even need to be in the same time zone as we are. And, you know, we're getting great productivity and great work out of them. So if we go through this and haven't changed our fundamental understanding of work and work-life balance, I think it will be a pandemic wasted.
I'd like to echo that. We think about all the emotional work that has gone on since March and what we are learning about the full nature of our work. And so when I think about equity and excellence, we want to think about that for our students always, but we also need to think about that for our staff, our advisors, our faculty. The pandemic has not had equitable impacts on everyone, and we need to stay very sensitive to understanding those situations and how we can support all of our community through this. And hopefully, as we've learned, I think Stacy talked about our humanity, how we carry that attitude forward post the pandemic.
Well, on that note, I think that what we're hearing here is that it's been both a chastening but also a humanizing experience, and that I'd like to maybe we should leave this phase of the session with those comments that once we get back to quote normal, I hope that we'll be very much perhaps not quite as utilitarian and instrumental in our approach, and that we'll start every meeting with just how are people doing, which is something that I've noticed a great deal over the past few months. People have been giving each other space and getting to know each other personally in a strange kind of way that you would imagine technology would actually provide obstacles to, but quite the contrary. We now know what everybody's living room and studies look like, for example. So I'd like to thank everybody who participated in this session. What we're going to do next is we'll close the live portion, and there'll be time for an online discussion at the conference itself, and so we'll see you all there online and in text. Thank you.